This episode is sponsored by Law Tiger San Diego. If you or a loved one is injured in a motorcycle accident, call 1-800-LAW-TIGERS for a free case evaluation. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Scenic Ride. My name is Sana, and this is a podcast where we explore some of the most epic motorcycle rides in North America and beyond. And today we're going beyond, more specifically to Peru. I will be joined on this episode by Redd Walitzki, who has spent the last few years riding across Central and South America and does a kind of slow riding and exploration that is really fascinating. We will be talking about everything from trip highlights so far to the scariest things about being a solo traveler to how to afford being on the road full time, and we'll also talk about riding in Peru specifically. So don't miss that conversation. It did go a little long, but I promise it's worth it. Before we get started, some quick housekeeping. We now have merch, a t-shirt and a crop top. It's got a really cool national park themed print that my friend Sal drew, and 30% of the proceeds will be donated to the National Parks Conservation Association. You guys know this by now, but I personally care deeply about our national parks, and we should do everything we can to preserve and protect them. So if you want to help out and grab a shirt, just go to thescenicride.com. Okay, that's it for now. Let's get into today's episode. Years ago, I had never ridden a dirt bike, and I'd never done any significant off-roading or international motorcycle traveling, but I was in my 20s and I rode a Harley, so I figured, how hard could it be? So when my sister told me she was getting married to her Peruvian boyfriend and that they were getting married in his hometown of Arequipa, which is the second biggest city in Peru, I decided that it would be a good idea to take a few extra days and rent a dual sport and ride the Andes. In the 10 years since that trip, I've rented bikes in many countries and states, and I've learned a lot about what to look for and how to prepare. But back in 2015, I had never done anything like that before. But again, how hard could it be? I found a small rental shop online and emailed them to book a tour. It would be me and my boyfriend at the time and a Peruvian guide. We didn't bring any of our own gear, which is not something I would do today. But I did ask them specifically to make sure they had women's-sized gear, and they said they did. When we got there, it turned out they did not, so I ended up in a combination of children's gear that was too small and men's gear that was too large. But whatever, it's all part of the adventure. We followed our guide through the very narrow and very busy city streets of Arequipa and up into the mountains. We were climbing quickly in elevation, and it was getting harder to breathe. There had been this massive rock slide right across the trail we were on, so we had to maneuver across some big rocks, and I ended up crashing pretty hard in that section. It was around that point that I realized that knowing how to ride a motorcycle on the street means absolutely nothing off-road. All my riding muscle memory and instincts were basically the opposite of what they should be on these trails. But we trudged on and rode through some absolutely breathtaking landscapes. We were surrounded by volcanoes, and there were llamas crossing the road in front of us. It really was everything that I think people think of when they dream of riding in South America. But then we got to even higher elevation, and it started raining, and then this thunderstorm rolled in with lightning, and it got pretty dangerous to be on the road. So our guide found us a shed behind this random abandoned building where we could hide and wait out the weather. When we got back on the road, we were riding on pavement again, but that didn't really help because next thing we knew, it started snowing, and the road was covered in a layer of snow that was hiding all the potholes and made riding very sketchy. On top of that, our guide was getting a flat tire, and told us that he had to keep moving. So he pretty much ditched out and left us to fend for ourselves in this pretty insane weather that neither of us were dressed for, and especially not me and my children's gear. But we somehow got through the snow and started our descent on the other side of the mountain, and suddenly we were riding these gorgeous switchbacks into a village in a canyon, and it was so spectacular that all the misery of the last several hours just kind of vanished. The next morning, my family came and met up with us in the village, and we headed to Colca Canyon, which is one of the deepest canyons of the world, to see the flight of the condors, and it was really freaking cool. I'm telling you this story for a few reasons. One is that despite how unprepared I was for this trip and how miserable big parts of it were, it still got me hooked on motorcycle travel. And it taught me that traveling this way is challenging and unpredictable, and sometimes it's really uncomfortable, but it's all part of the adventure. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. It would be a few more years after that trip before I actually got a dirt bike and learned to ride off-road properly, but it did make me realize that some of the absolute best, most pristine landscapes are the ones you can only get to by some sketchy little trail in the middle of nowhere. And that leads me to my conversation with Redd, who has made an entire lifestyle of finding trails that don't even appear on maps and exploring them at the pace they demand. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with that conversation. I am very excited to welcome our guest today. Redd is an adventurer, artist, and full-time traveler currently riding through South America on a Royal Enfield Himalayan. Hi, welcome to the Scenic Ride.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
I'm so excited to have you on. Can you just tell people a little bit about yourself and how you ended up on this crazy big adventure that you're on?
I was originally an artist living in the Pacific Northwest, and a few years ago, after starting some other travel, I realized I just had this lifelong dream of traveling with a motorcycle, and I also had a dream of traveling South America, so the two kind of seemed like they would go really well together. I started really making the plans at the beginning of the pandemic when I was going crazy, not being able to do other travels. So that's when I got the moto and literally walked into the store and was like, I'm riding this to Argentina. And they were like, what? You don't know how to ride a moto? Have been on the road for a little over 3 years. I usually do around 6 months at a time in chapters, and then I like to build in a little break for myself just because after about 6 months, you're so overloaded with everything. I mean, most people would know what it feels like to be on a moto trip for a couple of weeks. Now, just amplify that in foreign countries by a while of that, you're super exhausted. Sometimes I've flown back to the US to take like a 1 to 3 month break. This time I came back up to Colombia to take a short break. And yeah, then just going to keep exploring the continent and see where that goes.
I was going to ask, where are you right now? So you're in Colombia.
Yeah, I'm in Colombia. I'm at what I consider kind of one of my favorite home bases, which is this place called Donkey Sunrise, which is a motorcycle overland traveler hub. And they have a hostel and also camping. And it makes it kind of an ideal home base because even though right now I'm not traveling for a little while, I get to meet all the people who are still traveling. So it's kind of like having a fix of both things at once.
Yeah, it's really amazing to see that community come together. And also, you just got back from a ride right before we started recording. We actually had to push it a little bit. Uh, where
Yeah.
where did you go?
I went on a little 2 night overnight ride around. So, this region of Colombia is right next to the famous coffee region, Eje Cafetero. And that area is kind of where all the coffee is grown, but also where there's just lush rolling mountains, all these colorful jeeps, cute little towns. So I did like a little loop around there. I went to some hot springs I hadn't seen yet, where there's this huge waterfall in the hot springs. It was completely unreal. And yeah, then took some off roads to get back home.
That's amazing. I can't wait to see your stories from that. So you and I actually met in person. It was October 28th of 2021, and the reason I know the
Yes.
date is because it was my birthday.
Ah,
But I think you were just kind of preparing to start your adventure then. It was at a Royal Enfield event where we met. And I've been following your adventure ever since. Obviously, it's so incredible. You take these amazing photos and you really take your time with every region you ride through in a way that I don't follow any other travelers that do that, like that do this kind of slow travel that you do.
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about why you're traveling this way?
Yeah, so it sort of happened a little bit either accidentally or organically, however you wanna say, where before I traveled with a moto, I was traveling, kind of super slow, just going around Europe and Asia, but I would just rent a place for, like, a month and stay in, like, a little town and check out the area, and I realized I loved that because when you travel like that, you really become a local for a little while. So I had already sort of developed that as a style of just a lifestyle I liked, and then when I started with the moto, I wasn't sure how that would be because most people do go, like, A to B, and they go one route, and then that's it. But kind of as soon as I got into Mexico, I realized that wasn't gonna work for me because just every region, I would get there, and I'd do the 2 or 3 things that are famous, and then I'd meet locals, and they would tell me, "Oh, but the next town over has this, and the next town over has this," and I would just kind of fell in love with slowly roaming around and more like looking at each part, each area for what it is and kind of getting an understanding of it before I move on. I also have been working kind of as a digital nomad while I traveled. So those two things worked well together because often if I'm on like the road for a few days, then I need a few days to actually do some work or, catch up with online things. So staying in areas and exploring them in more detail kind of paired really well with that for me as well. And it's kind of what made it possible for me to go this slowly too, because I don't have the necessarily timeline of I have to be done in 6 months to get back to work or whatever that a lot of people do face.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, tell me where did you start and what was the original plan and how has that evolved over the past few years?
Yeah, so I consider this trip starting kind of from the Mexican border. I the year I got my moto did a shakedown trip where I did like a 10,000-mile ride through the West just to see if I could even do it. Um, and I kind of consider that its own trip because it was much, shorter, like a couple of months just going around in the Western states. And after that, realizing that it would work, I was like, okay, now time to head for South America. And I sent my bike on a truck down to the California border just because it was December and I didn't want to ride from Washington. um, so I sent it to our mutual friend Jesse's house and then started from there and crossed into Baja, spent a few weeks in Baja, which I just absolutely fell in love with. Like, it was almost like that's where the portal opened and I was like, "Oh my god, like my life now is gonna be this, just like finding these crazy beautiful places." Um, so after a couple of weeks in Baja, I went to mainland Mexico and there again, because I had tried to do so much research, I'm kind of that sort of person usually where I like look everything up and research everything. And everything I'd researched about Mexico was just people telling me it's dangerous, don't go. But as soon as I got there, I was like, I feel totally fine. Everyone here is amazing. And my visa is 6 months. So why would I spend any less than that? So I just started slowly meandering through Mexico. And I had found that there's these famous magic towns, basically like they're designated as historically important or magical by Mexico. And most people only go to, like, the top 20 of them because those are the really famous ones, but there's 140 of them. So as I started going through Mexico and finding all these cute little towns, I was like, "What if I use that actually to make my route?" So I would just pull up, like, where's the closest magic town? Oh, here's a little winding road that goes there, and I would kind of string them together, and in between, there's always something interesting, and you're never on the highway. So it was kind of a perfect way just to, like, meander confusingly around Mexico, but really see it as well.
I love the way you're doing it because I think a lot of people just don't necessarily know about all these things, like all these the magic towns, for example. I wasn't really familiar with them, and then I saw you started going to them, and that's how I like to travel too. I like to find a
Yeah.
specific theme, like I'm riding to all the national parks or like
Yeah.
visiting all the like roadside attractions of a certain kind, and just trying to like it's a really good way to make a trip and see things that you wouldn't normally or go places that you wouldn't normally go to just to check something off your list, essentially.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's like you definitely do it too, and I love seeing it because you have different types of what these waypoints are, but they're still like just as fascinating. And sometimes seeing someone else do it too, you're like, oh, like maybe I should look for these kinds of things that interest me. And I think it's a great way to do it for sure.
Yeah, and you and I have somewhat different types of interests, I think, which is really fun for me to see someone else. Like you're really into the like natural, like bugs,
Yeah.
insects, and birds and stuff like that. That I'm not really into myself, but I love seeing you get really excited to see like a specific, rare bird or something like that, and going for like going out to chase it. Like that's really a cool way to travel that a lot of people don't have the time or resources to do, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people, if they start thinking about it a little bit, could build this into their own trips, right? Because even if you only have 2 weeks, but you're like, what are my quest points? Like, what are these things that really light me up? And how can I get from A to B, but like include those things? I think that's a great way to explore.
Yes, because A to B doesn't have to be a straight line. There could be all sorts of wiggly lines, so circles, spirals.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yes. Did you speak Spanish before this trip, or and do you speak Spanish now? How does that work?
So before the trip, I had the classic Spanish in high school, which I thought would get me somewhere. But as soon as I was in Mexico, I realized I had completely forgotten all of it. Um, I had done some Duolingo kind of in the year building up to it, but that also was just so basic. Like I would say basically like vacation Spanish, where you can order in a restaurant, but that's about it. Um, and that was hard, I think, in Mexico, a lot of people do speak English, not in the tiny towns, and there were definitely a lot of moments where communication had to happen with, like, hands and signs and drawings or whatever, but more speak Spanish there than I would say in all the other country or English, sorry, more speak English there. Um, but that was kind of good because as I started going through, it just made me gradually use more and more Spanish. And I think actually one of the benefits of traveling solo has been that I'm forced to always speak Spanish a lot. I sometimes meet other travelers where if they're in a couple and one speaks Spanish but the other doesn't, it's hard for the one who doesn't to learn because they're just never the one speaking. And for me, I have to be the one speaking, I arrive at the end of the day, someone's gonna ask me stuff, even if I'm tired, I have to try to talk. So, it's gotten a lot better. I'd say now I'm conversational in settings where people are patient with someone foreign. There's still it always goes like it's a roller coaster, right? Where by Colombia, I was like, "Oh, I'm having full conversations, and I have friends who I only speak Spanish with." And then I got to Peru, and I was like, "Do I speak any Spanish?" Because the Spanish in the tiny towns in, like, the Andes is so accented and partly mixed with indigenous languages, and they don't understand me, I don't understand them. So, there's always room to grow.
And that's actually a really good segue because you mentioned Peru, and I specifically wanted to focus on Peru in this episode, because, well, one, because I can't cover all of South America in one episode. That would be like 4 hours long at least. And also because I've been to Peru and I've written there, so I have a little bit more of an understanding of like the writing and the culture, at least in parts of the country. But you've obviously done a lot more writing in Peru than I have. So what was your route through Peru, and are you planning to go back there, or are you kind of done and heading somewhere else next?
No, I'm definitely planning to go back there. Peru has been one of these things where I've been waiting to get there for so long that now it's almost built up to this, like, epic level in my mind that I don't know I can ever fully accomplish or do justice to. And it's a little bit of a puzzle because the one thing with really slow travel that doesn't matter when you're going a little faster is it becomes a total puzzle of how you make your visas work, both for yourself and for how long the moto can be in a country. So Peru, you only get 6 months per year total, and it's only 3 months at a time. And some of the countries, like Colombia, you can extend your first 3 months while you're in the country. You don't have to leave, but Peru, you have to leave. And that was kind of starting to be logistically difficult for me because it's such a huge country. And exactly the way I roam around slowly, it meant if I got too far into the middle, when my 3 months ran out, I would have a problem because then I'd have to just hightail it to one of the two borders. So I started writing it this January, and I was there for just over 2 months. And I was really only in the northern third of Peru, which is also not really, it doesn't really have any of the famous stuff people think about for Peru, but I absolutely loved exploring it, partly because it felt like being on this like almost blank part of the map, right? Where you're like, okay, here's Machu Picchu, here's like the southern Andes, here's Lima, and then I'm like, but I'm up here in this corner that nobody talks about.
That's literally my next question is, like, a lot of the big famous spots in Peru are in the southern half of the country, including the capital. Like, I've only been my when I was in Peru writing, my home base was in Arequipa, which is also in
Okay.
the southern
Yeah, in the
parts.
south.
Yeah, and, we were up in the Andes, and I'm assuming the landscape is somewhat similar, at least in the mountains, but,
Yeah.
watching your stories from the northern parts, it's just like I mean, also looking at a map of Peru, it's just like a lot of there's obviously the Andes that
Yeah.
runs through the whole country, but there's also all this jungle, and then there's the coast. So, yeah, just talk a little bit about what the northern parts of the country are like and what kind of regions you were riding through.
Yeah, it was super interesting. So I came in from Ecuador, and there's, I think, either 4 or 5 land borders you can take. And originally I had a different one in mind that's really small and on a dirt road. But I ended up taking one that was in the middle because there was also this crazy coincidence where right when I was in the area, this forest of trees flowered that only flowers 5 days a year. It's on the Ecuador side, but goes a little bit into the Peru side as well. They're called the Guayacanes trees. And I had just randomly, like, people had for weeks been like, if you're in this area, when the trees flower, you should go. And I didn't think it would happen. And then I was. So I like rode a day and a half to get to the middle of the country again to go to this forest. And that meant I crossed in this area, which was actually a tiny desert. So it's like scrub forest and there's goats, and you almost feel like you're in Morocco. I mean, I haven't been to Morocco, but that's a little bit what it felt like, where it's just like dry hills. I mean, even more like California, honestly, than anywhere I've been in South America. So that was cool. Like, you came in just middle of nowhere. And then I went out to the coast briefly, just because it was the perfect time for the coast. And the coast of Peru is interesting. It's a little bit complicated because that area doesn't have great infrastructure for anything. So you see a lot of poverty, you see a lot of trash, which is heartbreaking, because you're just going through this like pristine, like desert sand dunes could be beautiful, but then there's like mountains of trash. So it has a little bit of a dystopian quality to it. But when you get to the coast, it's spectacular. And I found this really amazing little beach town that's kind of off the radar, I think, because it's too far north and hard to get to and has sand roads. But it was just amazing for me because it's like only surfers and kind of this cool vibe, but then surrounded by all this like apocalyptic old gas industry infrastructure. And it was a boom town in the 1900s to 1950s. And Marilyn Monroe and Hemingway and all those people went there. And now it's just totally abandoned,
Wow.
which is, I mean, I love those things too, right? Where it's just history you've never thought about.
Yeah, and getting to experience things that, like, very few travelers actually get to experience because it's not along the most traveled,
Yeah.
tourist routes. So, one thing that I really love about following your travels is when you post something about how, you're really excited to ride a certain trail or road because it doesn't show up on Google Maps. Um, so to me, that would be terrifying, going somewhere that doesn't even exist on the map, and Just like Peru specifically, there was one road that I think you described as a marginal space through wilderness. Does it ever scare you to be going into these remote areas, especially when you're by yourself?
Yes, it absolutely does. It's kind of a battle against fear that I've been working on through this whole trip. Because I mean, people always ask me, like, what are you afraid of? And they think I'm going to say, like, humans or like someone attacking me. And instead, what I'm afraid of is me choosing one of these crazy, non existent roads and then either something breaking on the bike or me getting stuck out there and having to figure that out. That's actually what scares me. But I've had to face some of those scenarios now already enough that I feel a little bit more like whatever happens, it's gonna work out just because it has worked out, which might be naive and kind of a bad way, but I think you do start to think that way, the longer you are on the road where you're like, "Well, I got a flat tire in the middle of nowhere, but then a guy appeared with a Jeep when we fixed it together somehow." Like, enough of those things happen that you kind of prepare yourself, but then have a little bit of faith in the universe, coming through.
And I think you start to trust your own abilities a little bit more too. The more things, the more situations you get yourself out of, the more you trust yourself to get out of the next one, right?
Yeah, totally. I think with some of these, like, really unknown roads, I mean, part of it is past Mexico, you really can't trust any of the maps. So I've had enough times where, like, thought I was on a normal Google route, and then it turns into, like, a two-track through someone's yard with a fence in the middle, and, like, Google's still showing it as, like, Highway 14, and you're like, "This isn't actually a thing." And sometimes the really tiny roads surprisingly turn out to exist more than you think, just because they're new and those areas haven't been mapped yet. So, like, actually in Peru, one of my favorite roads I did, I think, ever on a motorcycle. It was so beautiful. Most of it isn't on Google Maps at all. I don't think I would have found it if I hadn't gotten the track recommended by some other travelers who had also explored there already. And they were like, "This doesn't show up on the map, but it exists." And I was like, "Okay, I guess I believe them." And it turned out to be like a wide enough highway that two cars could have passed. I mean, still dirt, but it was almost like one of the like off-road type roads in Colorado, where you're just like, yeah, this is like a normal, like, people I'm sure take buses on it here.
Right. Yeah.
But on Google, there's like 100 miles of it that's not pictured. And even on satellite, if you look on the satellite maps, you can't see it because nothing's flown over there in a couple of years. So
Right. I did want to just quickly circle back to you saying that it's not like you're more scared of your own decision making than of like humans on the trails. But
yeah.
I think another thing that you posted about was on one of those roads in Peru, you ran into some local that wanted to sell you human remains.
Yes. That was
What?
one of the weirder things that's happened. Yeah, so generally, I would say 99% of all run-ins I've had with people on my whole trip have been really good, and then maybe, like, 0.1% has been weird, and then, like, even less of that has been times where I'm like, "Okay, I need to get out of here. I'm scared." But this one, it was actually on that road, that didn't exist on Google, and that area is, it's known because it has all these pre-Incan, cultures, and a lot of them did things like cliff burials, and I'd seen some of them in the museum, and I was, excited to see some of the cliff sites in person too. But then I was on this road, in the middle of nowhere. I'm riding with, my partner, but he was ahead already and out of headset reach. And this guy came up the road on a small moto, which happened and stopped and was like kind of excited and was like, first, like, "Hey, did you see my friend come by 10 minutes ago?" And we hadn't seen anyone for like 5 hours. So I was like, "No, sorry, nobody." And then the guy's like, "Oh, can we take a selfie together?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's also pretty normal," especially somehow in Peru, people love like, I felt like almost like a mini celebrity because every time we got to, like, a bridge that was closed, they'll be like, "We'll open it for you for a selfie," so this guy's like, "Let's take a selfie," and I'm like, "Okay." And I took off my, goggles, and when I took off my goggles, he was like, "Oh, like you're a gringo. Gringos like to buy artifacts." And I was like, "What?" Like, I don't know where you got that from, but no, like I'm just traveling on a moto. I'm kind of trying to keep it light. I'm like, where would I put artifacts on this moto? And he's like, "No, no, no. Gringos always buy artifacts from me." And then instead of opening the camera on his phone, he opened his camera roll and started showing me photos of some of these like burial tombs and cliff burials, but like with him going in there and like taking stuff. And he's like this kind of thing. If you want to buy it, I can get that for you. And I was like, no, really, I'm good. And then just kind of, we took one photo and I left like really quickly.
That's crazy. Can you, I
But
mean, well, again, even if you were interested in buying some human remains, where would you keep it on your motorcycle?
well, that was my first question, but then I realized he also is on a motorcycle and getting them from these cliff burials, presumably on his motorcycle. So maybe that was the like least weird part of the equation for him, where he's like, "Well, I drive around mummies all the time." But
Oh,
yeah, it
wild.
was just one of those crazy moments. And then, I mean, I had so many questions, right? Because like nobody else takes this road. How many gringos have shown up here wanting to buy mummies, and who are they?
Who are they? Right.
Who are
Yeah.
they?
So
Yeah.
many questions. But yeah, I guess if you're on the road for 3 years, you're gonna have some pretty weird interactions. And
Yeah. Well, and even with that, like, I didn't feel in danger or anything, it more was, like, not a character I wanted to spend too much more time around, and I think he might have been a little drunk already at, like, noon, and some of
yeah,
those things you just
that
have
makes
to
sense.
back away and
Yes. What about the altitude? So I know the Andes are obviously like you can get up to like 10, 11,000 feet, probably higher, depending.
16 is the highest passes you can drive over, I think, there,
Wow.
so, yeah.
So I know your home base in the US, I think is in Colorado, right?
Yeah, I've been there a couple of summers.
So you're kind of used to the elevation, but how does that work when it's like you're going up and down mountains, it's change of elevation, like how are you dealing with that?
Usually here, I've had enough time to acclimate because especially when you are going slow, you're in those areas a little bit longer. I have had a couple of times where if like my home base is at like 5 or 6,000 feet, and then I go over a pass, I'll feel it. I'll feel like dizzy or a little bit just like, woo. But I would say by Ecuador, it had gotten a bit better for me. I have had times where friends flew in to visit me and rented a moto, and they really felt it.
Mhm.
Like my friend flew into Quito, which is at 10,000 feet from sea level. And then we had to get out of Quito, you have to cross a pass that's like over 11. So at that point, she had a headache but there are some things you can do a little bit. I mean, just like kind of taking care of yourself, getting good sleep, sleeping lower, then going higher, all those normal things. And in the Andes in particular, people also drink or chew coca leaves,
Mhm.
which is actually like I have tried it a few times. It's crazy they even sell them in the national parks, which would for us be unheard of. But here it's just part of the culture. And that does help. It kind of makes you feel a little bit more focused, and it takes away that headache and that kind of feeling of like not quite knowing like what you're doing. But I'm interested to see because it's definitely I've only been I think I went up to over 16,000, but not on the moto when I went up Chimborazo. And on the moto, I've gone to about 14 and was fine. But there's a few areas in lower Peru and in Chile that are even higher than that, where I'm like, let's see. And I don't know actually how my moto will like it either, because when you start with 24 horsepower.
That's another great segue because my next question is about the bike. So I want to talk about the Royal Enfield Himalayan as your choice of motorcycle for this trip. Because obviously you and I met at a Royal Enfield Himalayan event, and
Yeah,
that's kind of how we connected in the first place, I think, too.
yeah, totally.
Because I used to own a Himalayan, and I love those little bikes, but
Yeah.
the 411 is not the most powerful machine. It's a tractor. It'll go
Yeah.
anywhere, but and you're traveling slow, so it might be perfect for that. But just tell me a little bit about why did you choose the Himalayan for this trip?
So, I mean, I chose the Himalayan partly because I didn't know anything about motos. So I very naively, when I had this notion of, well, I always owned scooters. I had been riding like adventure scooters in Asia. And then I was like, well, I just need a moto that I can like go on adventures with. And I literally Googled that. I Googled like, moto you can take on adventures, like not knowing there's adventure bikes or anything. And a photo popped up of a Himalayan and I was like, that's it. That's like just my mental image of the bike I want to be riding across the world. And I think maybe as an artist, like the visuals are important to me too, where like there's bikes where every stat is great on paper and I look at it and I'm like, that's just not my romantic notion of what I want to be riding. So it started very idealistically like that, but I also tried to do the research, and part of the research was that everything I read said that there were more dealers and service centers in South America, and that it was a common bike here. Um, and originally in the US, when I was riding it so much and needed service all the time, I was really struggling because actually there aren't very many dealerships, and I mean, most moto dealerships have really long service waits anyways. At least in Seattle they did. You'd have to book like 6 weeks out sometimes. And, I was riding like 2,000 miles a month. That's just not gonna work.
Mhm.
But once I got to Mexico, it totally came true where, like, there were a lot of dealerships and they always have parts in stock. And in South America especially, it's been an easier bike to get parts for than either a Yamaha or a Honda, because partly they only sell tiny bikes here. So if you show up at a Honda dealership and you have an Africa Twin, they're still gonna be like, "Well, we have to order this from the capital and it'll be this long." If you've gotten to a Royal Enfield dealership, they have parts for it.
And you've done a lot of work to yours, both aesthetically and, I'm assuming functionally too. What is the origin story of your bike? Like, its name and, the design and everything?
So his name is Kaleidos, which is sort of the same root as kaleidoscope. And in Greek, that would mean to see beauty, or like literally like beauty which is seen. Which when I got the bike, I could only, because again, it was pandemic times, I could only get the one with kind of the military pattern. And that was the only one I didn't want. I was like, I'll take any color except for the military one. And then they were like, you can have that one. And I was like, oh no. Okay. And I was just like looking at it and looking at it. And I'm like, well, I like the idea of the pattern. I just don't like that it's gray and kind of army-esque. So I came up with this idea to put holographic triangles that overlap the other triangles, which makes it kind of look like a kaleidoscope. But then in the end, that name suited it perfectly too, because that's been our mission together, is just to see all these really beautiful places. And yeah, I've spent a lot of time customizing it more just to make it exactly how I need. And it's been kind of like when a part wears out or sometimes when something breaks, I'm like, okay, what's the best thing I can get instead? And just like turn it into this thing that's really going to take me around the world. So now it's custom suspension, custom wheels, a rainbow headlight that lights up with LEDs.
Is
So yeah.
there is there any like, if you were to buy a brand new Himalayan today, what would be the first like, out of all the modifications you've done, what do you think has made the most impact? What would be the first thing you would do to a new bike?
Hmm. It's funny because I think the last thing I did would be the first thing I would do again, which is get really good suspension. And for me, that happened more in parts because I had gotten the front and the rear and then blew up the rear and then went back to stock. And now I have Ohlins on the rear. And it transforms the bike because it just makes it so handle so much better off road. And actually, like you can push the speed a bit more off road, where before I was riding in this same area with some people and I would always be the last in the pack, partly because you're just feeling every bump and you're bouncing around and everyone else is just like, oh, I'm on a cloud, I have a KTM or whatever. So now that's helped a lot. I also, one of the harder ones to, I hate recommending it because it's tricky to do, but I got Warp 9 to build me some aluminum rimmed wheels, which are both lighter and stronger and actually instantly transform how the bike handles. It makes it so much more nimble. Where for anyone who's ridden a Scram compared to a Himalayan, it now feels like you're riding a Scram, but you have the advantage of the front wheel being the 21 inch. but that's a tricky one to do because I don't think they offer that in general.
Mm.
I think there's a few builders in Europe who do, but
Have you been thinking about upgrading, or are you in it for the long haul with the bike?
so this bike is like my bike soulmate. Like it's just stupid. Like we fell in love in high school and we're still in love. Whenever I ride other bikes and I come back to this bike, I'm just like, no, I love this bike. But I will say that this bike, in the context of somewhere like South America, really works. Because sometimes I go maybe 5 weeks without ever hitting over 40 miles an hour. Like I actually had, I think, 2 weeks where I never reached fifth gear. And when I finally reached it, I was like, oh, like I have a fifth gear when most people wish it had a sixth. Partly it suits what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I more wish it was lighter. Like if it could be like 40 pounds lighter, even, I would be so stoked. But that's just kind of the battle I have. And sometimes it keeps me in check because I think if it was more of a light dirt bike type bike, I would try even crazier trails I probably have no business being on by myself. So
It is interesting because you and I have talked a little bit about the Himalayan 450 because I just had one on loan from Royal Enfield for a couple of weeks. And,
I
as
just got
someone,
to try one. Yeah.
oh, you did? What did you think?
So I only tried it for about an hour and a half, and I did a lot of road and then only a tiny bit of off-road. And on the road, I thought it was brilliant. Um, and then once I got into the off-road, I still liked my old one more. So it was kind of like interesting because if I was doing more touring or more twisties, I could definitely see really that bike being a great choice. But for what I do, I still wasn't convinced. And especially because some of my upgrades make my bike feel more like that bike. It's like, well,
No, that's a really good point because the reason I got rid of my Himalayan is because I was riding it mostly here in California in the US. And to get anywhere, to go to any trail here, you basically have to get on the highway. And the 411 was just, you basically throttle wide open in the slow lane. And if you have the wind on your back and you're going downhill, you might be able to do 75 miles an hour, but that's still not a guarantee. Um, and the 450, it's so much more powerful. The difference in power is like stark and noticeable on the freeway. Like that one will do 85, no problem. But for the type of writing that you're doing, it makes a lot of sense to have the 411. I can see that bike being just perfect for the type of slow, kind of meandering off-roading that you're doing. I think also when I bought my 411, they were telling me at the dealership, like they were kind of hard to get. Those also in 2021, like early
yeah.
2021, they were pretty hard to come by. And my dealership here in San Diego was saying that a lot of it, they were attributing it to itchy boots because that's like back when she was riding around the world or through South America on a Himalayan, and so they were so popular that like you couldn't even really get them for a little bit, and for the type of riding that she was doing, they seemed to be perfect as well. Have you had any bad breakdowns or anything catastrophic happen to it yet? That's been like really expensive and bad.
So it's never left me stranded. It's, I would say, needs more regular maintenance than some bikes, and it needs more wearable items replaced than some bikes. So, for example, for me, I go through a lot of bearings, especially the headstock bearings. I had a whole battle with where they were only lasting a few thousand miles, which is crazy. And now, like wheel bearings and stuff like that, I know I change more than people with a Honda, for example, because just none of those things are sealed. And I think it's partly like the bike is designed in India for Indian use, and there to slap a new bearing in is like probably under $5. If you're doing that in the US, it's expensive. If you're doing it here, it's like annoying, but okay. Um, after 40 something thousand miles, had the top end replaced. But Royal Enfield actually was really great. Royal Enfield Columbia kind of sponsored a rebuild for me and didn't ask anything of me. I was just like, hey, this is what I'm doing. And they were like, yeah, bring it to Bogota and you can pay the labor and we'll cover the parts. And like the labor was insanely affordable here, and the parts would have been almost half a Himalayan. So that was really wonderful.
I mean, you are out there doing the best possible advertising for them every day. So that seems like a small
Yeah.
investment on their part. And that's really good, just brand goodwill also. I feel like
Yeah.
the Royal Enfield is really good about that, like supporting the people that support them, essentially, in a
I
way
do
that I
feel
haven't
that way.
experienced with other motorcycle brands.
Yeah, I often feel like even just randomly when you show up on a Royal Enfield at a Royal Enfield and you're from far away, like you almost feel like it's part of a family where everyone there gets so excited and they're, what do you need? Like, what can we do? Where I don't feel that way. I mean, I also have a Suzuki, a old DR 650, and like that's a cult bike in a different way, but it's not like you show up at a Suzuki and they're like, what do you need? They're just like, cool, you're another person on a DR, like
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a different
totally.
kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a couple of Yamahas, and that's same thing there.
Yeah.
I guess what does a typical day on the road for you look like?
So like it's a little hard to say one typical day because there's kind of a few types, but I would say my favorite type of day on the road is when I'm in the flow of traveling and I've kind of worked my way into an interesting area. Because usually, like at the very beginning of any trip stage, you're in a city, it always takes a while to get out of the city, that stuff. So once I've gotten my way into kind of like a more nature or like rural area, a typical day would be like I wake up with a little bit of a plan in mind, like, hey, that road looked interesting, or okay, over here there's this waterfall, or I've heard that you can see this kind of a hummingbird or opossum or whatever it is. And then I kind of like finish making my route over coffee. I always carry really good coffee. That's like my one vice, which is good because I ride through all the coffee regions. And then I make my route, usually using a combo of either starting with Google, but then often now drawing it in Gaia, because then I can use more of the really small trails, upload it to my Garmin, and then I kind of head out and see. And ideally, the road would be like just a few hours of either really beautiful, like 1 to 2 lane twisties, or just like, true dirt roads. I don't want to make it sound like I'm doing highly technical stuff because the majority of it is more like beautiful gravel roads or maybe 2 track that just runs through really scenic countryside you wouldn't otherwise see. Because for me, like every once in a while, I like the challenge of being like, okay, I have to cross this landslide, or like, this trail's really hard. But in general, what I prefer is just the dirt roads go through places where no one else is going other than locals. So you're on these roads and it's like a farmer rides by in a giant, like, local hat and has 16 bags of potatoes on his donkey. I'm like, that's the part I want to see.
Yes. And where do you stay at night? How do you find places to stay?
Yeah, I use a mix of techniques. In till Colombia and Ecuador, I would often scout around on Booking the most, because it had the most things available where you can just kind of see like where's it at, what are the pictures like, and then I'll usually contact them directly. Here, everyone uses WhatsApp, so if I find a cool place, I'll just write them on WhatsApp and be like, "Hey, do you have space tonight?" Because they'll almost always give you a much better price. And then they also get the money directly. If
Mhm.
you're using Booking, then they only get like 40% of the price or something, which for family owned places is a pretty big difference. By Peru, I was sort of more winging it because honestly, the infrastructure is so much less there, where the towns I end up in, there usually have like 1 or 2 motel hotels where it's actually like someone renting a room above their little like tienda shop. So there I would more just show up and be like, hey, do you have a room? And then they would usually have one for like $8 to $10, and you just kind of make it work. But then you also never know what you're getting. So it could be nice, it could be like really not nice. It's a little bit of that chaos of being on the road.
That's part of the adventure, right?
Yeah. Oh no, I was gonna say I haven't been camping in this northern part of South America. I had my tent along with me for a little while, but I just never used it because partly being in the subtropics, it rains so much, especially at night, that then you're kind of always faced with packing up a wet tent or like you finish the ride wet and then get in your wet tent. And lodging is so inexpensive that for me, it hasn't been enough of a like budget concern to make it worth it. But
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You did mention that you're doing some digital nomad stuff. So I think I have to ask because it's like, I feel like that's the number one question that people always ask of people who are traveling full time is basically how can you afford it? So are you
yeah.
okay with sharing a little bit about your work and stuff like that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would say, like, my situation was fairly unusual, because my art background also went hand in hand with kind of a graphic design background, and before I left on the trip, I founded a company with a friend, that I was able to work for remotely, so I was in that lucky position where it was my company, I can make the choices, but I can be away, which is tricky to set up, but definitely possible to set up. The company is called Moth and Myth, and actually last November it was sold to a really wonderful longtime customer of ours who's now running it. So yeah, I have a really good continuing relationship with the new owner, where I'm still able to do contract work for it. But I've met a ton of people on the road who have such interesting ways of making it possible, and some of them, it's like a more traditional digital nomading where they just work for like a data entry kind of thing. And for some people, it's that they had some kind of property and now they're renting it out. There's all these different ways to build that puzzle as long as you kind of think out of the box a little bit and also realize that often life on the road, especially in countries like South America or Asia or like any of those countries, costs so much less than
Mhm.
life in the US. So if you're in the US and you're like, well, I can't be a digital nomad because I would need this much every month, you could probably cut that in half and live insanely comfortably in most other countries. So that can, I think, give people a little bit of a way to look at it where you're like, okay, I don't need to make a ton if I want the freedom to be on the road. I only need to make enough that I can pay for my $8 a night hotel and some gas.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Any other tips that you want to share with people who kind of want to who dream about doing a trip like what you're doing?
I think my biggest tip is just go, like the main conversation I end up in, either if I'm on breaks back in the States or just around people here who are dreaming about doing it, is like, well, I'd love to do that one day, but I can't because XYZ. And of course, some of those reasons are real and people have commitments that they can't just walk away from. But if it's really your dream, I think there's, a lot you can do to make it something you can do and then stop worrying and just go because you're never going to be ready. Like when I left, I wasn't ready. I'm still not ready. I still don't know how to fix 99% of the things on my bike and sort of only halfway fix a tire on a good day. But you realize pretty quickly that mainly what you need is just that will to be
Mhm.
doing it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a really good place to leave it. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's great. I've loved this conversation.
Good, me too. I really do wish we could keep talking. Maybe we'll have you on to talk about another region or country at another time.
We'll have a sequel where I'll still be just as far away from Ushuaia.
Yes, I love it. And if people want to follow your adventure, where can they find you?
So I update most frequently on Instagram, where my handle is explo.red with two D's, like explored. I also on my website have some photo galleries up of all the different stages where I've broken it up by kind of regions, so Mexico, Central America, and that website is my name, Redd, Redd, Walitzki, Walitzki. You can leave the link for them. Yeah, and that's the main places to find me. And of course, feel free to send me a message if you have any questions about any of this craziness.
Perfect. I will add links to your website and Instagram in the show notes for this episode as well, so people can find you. Because honestly, I know you don't post that much on like the main feed of Instagram, but your stories are so good. Just like Follow
Thank
Redd
you
just
so
for
much.
the stories. Like, it's so worth it. Some of the best just travel documentation that I've seen on social media. I just love following your adventures.
Thank you so much. It's so mutual.
Oh, thank you. Well, it was so good to see you, and thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll keep listening to all the episodes to get ideas of other beautiful roads to go riding
Perfect.
on.
That's exactly what I want. So, thank
All right.
you. That is it for today's episode. Thank you to Redd for joining me, and thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to follow at The Scenic Ride on Instagram for the latest updates and to check out some really cool photos from Peru, all taken by Redd. Okay, I'll see you guys in the next episode, and in the meantime, enjoy the ride. The Scenic Ride is written and produced by me, Sana Bowman. Our theme music is by Ryan Sin. If you like the show, please rate and review it and tell your friends to listen. For all the latest updates, follow at The Scenic Ride on Instagram and Facebook or visit thescenicride.com.